we became distance investors by default. So we would have a borrower move from Virginia down to Florida, and now they're doing fix and flips in Florida. Sure, why don't we lend in Florida? Like it just it was slowly just a side hustle. And then when the pandemic happened, the world just shut down here in Virginia in about March of 2020.
Welcome to the Going Long Podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so that you feel much more comfortable as well as confident investing beyond your backyard. And yes, I am your host, Billy Keels, and I'm super excited to welcome you back to today's conversation because it's going to be another awesome one. So, yeah, this one's like really, really cool. Amazing energy, like super, a new topic that we've not talked about a lot before. And I know you're going to get a lot out of it, especially if you like money and if you like understanding how money works. It's going to be very cool. Listen, so as I mentioned before, like we continue to move up the charts. It's amazing. Thank you so very much. We are continuing to build our Going Long podcast family. It's amazing. So many of you have already taken action. You've left your honest written reviews. If you've not done that yet, if you've not had a chance to do that yet, go ahead and do that. Especially on the Apple podcast platform, we made it super easy. We have a nice little short video. Take a look at it and make sure that you leave that nice, honest review, written review, as well as rating. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you'd like to see more of, less of, these types of things. Amazing. Secondly, so many of you want to find previous episodes that you can't find on your platforms. This is some of the stuff that we find out through your reviews. You can just go to not the Going Long Podcast. All you need to do is go to billykeels.com. When you get there, it's going to change a little bit the screen, and then you're going to see the podcast tab. Go to the podcast tab. You can find every single audio and video podcast. Check that out, and you'll be able to find everything you need. Once again, it's billykeels.com. Once you get there, go to the podcast tab. You can find every single podcast. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more about some specific opportunities that we have for accredited investors, you want to connect with other accredited investors, just send me an email. Send it to aiclub@billykeels.com. Once again, that's aiclub@billykeels.com. We'll get you connected. You and I will have a conversation. It's going to be really, really awesome. And you can meet and connect with some other accredited investors. So send that to aiclub@billykeels.com. It's going to be awesome. And listen, with that, if you've ever wanted to know anything like understand the gap between knowing something and understanding something, if you've ever wanted to know what it was like to fix a very specific type of goal or dream in order to help you understand why you're investing in real assets, cash flowing assets, like today is a conversation that you're really going to be excited that you listen to, because aside from understanding some of this, you're going to find out more about money, some of the things specifically, what it takes when you're looking at different parts of the real estate space. This is a space that, well, those people that are high wage earners and maybe you want to just make sure that your money's working as hard for you as possible. You don't want to do the landlording thing. You don't want to do any kind of fix and flip or wholesaling and any kind of stuff, which I know a lot of you are not doing, but this is something that's going to be new for you. You find out a little bit more about the private lending space, people that are doing it very, very well, have lots of experience, and you're going to be able to hear all of that from Alex Breshears, and we're going to hear that just after this. Are you looking for a way to get to long distance investing success, but not spending all the effort? You want to do it in a way that's much faster and it doesn't cause as much pain? Well, listen, I can save you all of that stress. Just go to billykeels.com/7 mistakes and you can pick up your free PDF to help you on your road to long distance investing success. So you know what? If you want to know how long distance investing success can come through private lending, as well as other connections, then guess what? Today's a conversation you're going to want to listen to until the very last word, I promise, because check this out. Like today's guest, like super awesome, so amazing energy, like even from the very beginning. But you know what? She's actually on a path to own something that most people only rent. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to put a pin in it, and I'm sure she's going to tell us a little bit more about that. She's also a military spouse with a knack for building amazing communities, and she's used to choosing, family consistently over choosing a location. That sounds really, really cool for people like us here at the Going Long podcast family. And she is the co-owner of Lend to Live. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's conversation, Alex Breshears. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you know what? I'm really looking forward to it. And by the way, everybody, she also has 4 dogs and 4 birds. Like that, I think that's really kind of cool. It's absolutely amazing. So, Alex, listen, so as we were talking before, and I already love the things that you're going to talk to us about, that I like to ask everybody at least 5 questions. No one's ever only had 5 questions, but at least the first 2, well, you're going to get them in the very beginning, right before you kind of talk about what you've done. And then you're going to get 3 towards the end, which are the Going Long final 3. But the thing is, I'm really ready for everybody in the Going Long family to get to know you. So are you ready to kind of start to tell us where you live in the U.S.?
Absolutely. Let's roll. So
all right, let's do
it. Most of the time I am in Hampton Roads, Virginia. We own a short-term rental that's up in the mountains, about 4 hours from here. So I do occasionally go up there and work when the property's free. My family lives in Florida, so I'm sometimes down there. My business partners are in Missouri and others that are in Washington. So I have the nice ability to just kind of pick up and go and fly somewhere for a week and go work out of Washington with my business partner if I wanted to. And mentioned Europe. My husband actually lives abroad. So I will get to go visit him for the first time in about 6 months.
That's awesome.
So I'll be in Europe, working out of Europe for about 3 weeks.
Oh, that is just music to our ears. Like this whole, whenever it's location, like you're like, I'm doing this stuff and I'm here and I'm in Missouri and I'm in Florida. Well, I'm also too in my place here in Virginia. Sometimes I'm there. I'm going to be in Europe. We love that here, by the way, Alex. So you're good. You're in great company. Appreciate you sharing that with us. And the other thing that I would love for you to share with us now, please, is help us understand what's the most positive thing that's happened to you in the last 24 hours?
In the last 24 hours?
Yes.
It's going to sound insane, but I bought my sister a refrigerator.
I love it. I love it. Now, most people will be like, you bought her a refrigerator. No, what, like, there's got to be a story behind that. What's the story behind that?
My sister and brother-in-law live in Florida, and they are both first responders. They're both paramedics.
Okay.
They have been paramedics throughout this entire global pandemic. And Florida has had the privilege of basically having a governor that doesn't act like there's a pandemic. So their hospitals have been overrun with COVID cases for almost 2 years now. She gave birth to her first child during the pandemic. And since her husband is, obviously working directly with COVID positive patients, he wasn't actually allowed in the room when she gave birth. And shockingly, paramedics get paid very, very little, like very, very little. I'm like, their job is literally to save people's lives. Yeah. So just with the pandemic and having a little one, like they were just in a position where it's like their fridge is about to die. And the way the global supply chain is here right now, it's like, you could have a fridge in 3 weeks or 3 months or, depending. I was just like, look, I'm going to take this off your plate. It's not charity. It's just like, you guys work really hard. The pandemic's going on. You need one less thing to worry about. We'll get you a fridge.
Yeah. You know what? And the fact that you that was like one of the most positive things that's happening in the last 24 hours. I absolutely love that. And you're talking about the supply chain, and kind of depending on what people are listening to this, like we're at a point where the global supply chain is still kind of disrupted. So it's not just happening in the US, it's also happening. I can tell you here, I had a car that I literally had to wait for about, I think it was almost 4 months for the car to show up. That same car nowadays, it takes about 6 to 8 months, if not 9 months. So yeah, I mean, it's just, we're in a very, very unique time in life. So appreciate you sharing the positivity, gets us on the roll, and things are fantastic. So here's the thing though, Alex, and I don't know if you know this, but maybe you do. I try to do something that's like almost impossible. Like I give myself this really, really impossible task. And that is the task of trying to tell your backstory in literally, 2.5 seconds, something like that, which is almost impossible. Well, it's not almost impossible. It is impossible, but I like to kind of set the bar high and I try to do these kinds of things. So anyway, I really, really hope, because the Going Long family, they really, every single week, they forgive me. Or I guess a couple times a week, they forgive me. And I really hope that you will also forgive me for trying to tell your backstory in 2.5 seconds. But more importantly, I really hope that you can help me, number one, by you telling your own backstory in your own words. And the other thing that I think would be really, really helpful is while you're telling your backstory, if you could really help me and the Going Long family understand more about some of the major decisions that you've made to get to this point in your journey. And then from there, we'll see where you and I take the conversation.
Absolutely. No problem.
Cool. Thanks. Over to you.
All right. So obviously military spouse. I've been a military spouse for 21 years. I had no idea what that would entail. I always tell people the difference between knowing and understanding is the width of the Grand Canyon. And so when I married into the military, no idea what I was getting myself into. It's been wonderful. And at the same time, I call it a blessing and a curse. A lot of things in my life are that way. And it forced you to move. And I don't say that from a victim mentality standpoint, because I think it's really easy to get caught up in that victim mentality of oh, the military moved us here and the military moved us there. And, the market's down and we couldn't buy a house and we couldn't get something to rent and just all these things that you can't do. So when I say the military moved us, it's really the action in my brain is I chose to keep my family together and move where the military sent him. And I make that distinction now because my spouse got stationed in Europe. And when he came home to tell me this, I was like, I love you, but I'm not going, right? And he's like, yeah, I understand. You've done your 20 years, you're good. But the reason I call it both a blessing and a curse is I've not lived close to family in almost 20 years. We've not lived close to his family. We've missed out on some major life milestone things. But now that we're in a position where the world has opened up, I think somewhat due to the pandemic, it forced technology forward. I can now do this lifestyle where I can work from anywhere for as long as I want. And as long as I get coverage for the birds and the dogs, I can go pretty much anywhere I want for as long as I want. And it sounds like an unreachable goal for people because it sounds like, oh, I need to have millions of dollars to do this. And it's not really, I'm all about cash flow. So I'm purely a cash flow investor, obviously doing private lending. So as long as you have the cash flow to cover what your expenses are and your expenses where you're going, you're good. And the reason I tie that into the military is because I didn't get the opportunity to, start a career and advance in a career and move forward and have a 6-figure income, like a military officer would. And it's again, not coming from a place of being a victim. It's just, how do I have some sort of fulfillment financially for myself? Because the military calls me a dependent and I freaking hate it with a passion. And so how do I come up with fulfillment for myself financially while still choosing my family, while still moving? And a lot of the military spouses I know, when they say, oh, I'm going to start a business, they often end up in something like an MLM, Scentsy or makeup or whatever. And there's nothing, I don't want to say there's anything wrong with that, but that's not your business. You're building someone else's business. And that kind of led to, how can I invest in real estate without having to be a landlord? Because I tried that and I hated it. Without having to do fix and flips, because I tried that and hated that. And then the doors just kind of opened to this buffet of other options. And I'm like, cool, why don't we do this? And private lending just sort of fell into my lap.
So as private lending falls into your lap, but then you the last couple of things you were talking about was it opened this door, you got into real estate, you realized the MLM thing is not really your thing. But you get into fix and flips, you get into the wholesaling and landlording and these types of different things, right? But I guess, and I guess because I'm always just really, really interested in why people even get involved in real estate, period. And there's a million different things, to your point, you can get involved in. You kind of talked about where you are now, but you could have chosen a number of different things. You could have done, maybe you didn't have to do anything, or you could have done trading penny stocks, or you could have started your own literal brick and mortar business, or you could have gone online to e-commerce. Why in the world, what was it that attracted you specifically to the real estate realm?
It's going to sound funny, but it's horses.
Okay. I like this. So listen, it's horses, right? So I think when I was doing my really, really kind of, my 1.5 seconds of trying, or 2.5 seconds of trying to introduce you, I said that you are on a path to own something that most people only rent. So maybe, does it have anything to do with horses by any chance?
It does.
Oh my goodness. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Tell us a little bit about this.
My world revolves around horses.
Yeah, it's not just birds and dogs. It's not just birds and dogs. Okay, cool. So here we go. So we got to this. Now we're going. So see, everybody, listen. These things do tie into the conversations we're actually having. So talk to us a little bit about why real estate.
So one of the things I learned really early on is that I lived in a fashion that I could dictate what I wasn't, instead of living into a label of what I was. I've always had just one label, and that was horse person. And I have the definition, and I talk about labels because labels are so important, because the lies you tell yourself often become your truth. And so the limits I give myself for being a horse person is, I like these things. I want to live in these places, but it also involves, I need an income to pay for said horses. And the reason I kind of got started in real estate, I was actually working in a barn, right outside of high school, cleaning stalls, doing turnout, bringing horses in. And some of these horses, and this was back in the 90s, some of these horses at this barn were worth six figures at the time. And there was a lady, and obviously I'm there during the day because I'm cleaning stalls and I'm working. And this lady was there every day in the middle of the day, and I'm 19 about this time. And, she befriended me. I took extra care of her horse and whatnot. And she just literally comes up to me and she hands me $200 in cash. And she says, "Hey, can you go to the corner store and go get, Gatorade for me?" And I'm like, "I guess. How much Gatorade do you want?" And she's like, "Oh, just grab some Gatorade for me, a couple bottles for me and a couple bottles for you. It's fine." I'm like, "Okay." I got to go back out there and go get my keys. And she's like, "No, here." She literally throws her keys at me, her Lexus SUV. And I still love this car to this day. And she's like, "Here, just take my SUV." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm 19. I clean stalls. You just handed me $200 cash. And now here's my Lexus. Go drive it." And I'm like, "Okay." And
hey, Alex, I have one question for you, because since these are evergreen and these can be going on forever, I just kind of want to give people some perspective. So she's just giving you $200, keys to the Lexus, and she asked you to buy some bottles of Gatorade. How many bottles of Gatorade at that time could you have purchased with $200? Just to give people some perspective.
I would say probably, because I went to 7-Eleven, I would probably say 150.
Correct.
And I was just like, okay. And when I came back, I went to give her the change. She's like, no, you keep that. That's for your time. And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And then I started talking to her, and I was like, "What do you do?" Because obviously at 19, everybody has a job. So I'm like, "What do you do that you can be here in the middle of the day, every day taking care of this horse?" And she's like, "Oh," she goes, "My husband owns real estate." And I'm like, "Oh, so houses?" And she's like, "No, he owns retail shopping plazas. And so that's what we do, is we invest in real estate." And I'm like, oh my God. And just I kept running into successful people at this barn. And I always had the syndrome as I was looking over the fence. I was watching them take a lesson. I was watching them at the horse shows. I was watching them purchase new horses. And I was like, okay, everybody I've talked to at this barn is involved in real estate in some capacity. Maybe there is something to this. And that kind of started the journey, started joining the local R.E.I groups and talking to people and seeing what my options were.
Cool. So as you're looking to see what your options were and you get involved, so you kind of get this inspiration because this lady gives you $200 to go buy 5,000 bottles of Gatorade, which I think is pretty fun. I don't even want to know how many bottles you but I don't want to know. We don't want to know. We don't want to know. That's your business. So the thing is, and so then you went from that curiosity to actually start to take action. You're at R.E.I. But before you do that, did you always love horses as a child, or had you been exposed to them, or?
Yes. A lot of my life is by accident. So my dad signed me up for a day camp. I ended up on the wrong bus, and I ended up going out to a barn instead of going to play tennis. So when I came home, my dad's like, "Why are you filthy?" And I'm like, "Oh, I went to camp. We went and rode horses." He's like, "Wait, what?" I mean, this is back in the 80s.
Yeah, so it was a different time. So you just let your kids walk all over the place. They're all good. They eventually come back. Right. They came back. Yeah. Okay. No, so that helps. And so then as you start to get more and more active, you get on the wrong bus or you go to the wrong place and you come back. So that's what sets the real estate kind of in motion, because that falls in love with horses. You see the lady, the Lexus, and you kind of go from there. But I'm just curious then, number one, as you start to become more and more enthralled in this real estate realm, you'd also talked about before you tried the landlording, you tried the fix and flip, and those weren't your things. Tell us a little bit about what you were going through. Like what were some of the first things that you were reaching out and tasting, some would say, and then what was it about those specific areas of real estate that you did not like?
I was going to R.E.I meetings, and obviously I'm a Southerner. I've never met a stranger. So I'm just bumping into people, talking to people. And I had joined a local landlord association, and the stories I kept hearing, because this is Florida. Florida just in general is not a great cash flow market. It's an appreciation market. I didn't realize that back then, that there were differences. Yeah. But when I'm sitting there going to like these landlord breakfasts on Wednesday mornings, and I'm listening to people talk and hearing their stories and hearing their struggles, and I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. You're basically, it's this whole game of like keeping your fingers crossed is what you're playing for like 30 days at a time. So you hope someone pays the rent on the first. Then you spend the next 29 days hoping nothing breaks. And then maybe at the end of that 29 days, you get to keep $100, maybe $150 if it's a good rental. And then come the first, it starts all over again. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, why do people sign up for this? And I was, again, doing the math in my head, like, okay, board is probably $600 a month, farrier's another $200 a month. And I'm like, I'm going to have to own like 18 houses before I can even get a horse.
Oh my gosh. I mean, so there's so many awesome things that you just said. Like there's so many awesome things. And I just want I want the Going Long family. And I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but it's just like, it's amazing. These are great nuggets. Cause number one, you're talking about the reality when you want to go in and buy one or two properties, right? It is hey, get in and you hope that the rent's paid on time before the 5th, or if not with the fee. And then afterwards, it's like, what is going to break if it's not? And I know that there are a lot of people that are listening that are like, hey, I've had one or two properties and this really sounds like a real story. Like, cause most people don't even talk about that. And it's just so real. But what's even better, Alex, about what you're talking about, and this the thing that I do want the Going Long family to think about is, you were thinking about how many of these you would have to get the horse, right? Which is the why that you were doing this. I'm extrapolating. I'm saying that that's your why, but the fact that you could relate it directly to a dream that you had for yourself, I think is just phenomenal, right? And it's something that I would say as you go through the exercise for the Going Long family to understand why you want to do something. Then when you're able to understand the why, then what is it that you want to be able to do with the cash? Because cash in itself is probably worth very little, and every day it's worth less. But we won't get on that soapbox. So anyway, sorry. So you were telling us about how you were connecting to the number of horses you had.
So at the landlord meetings, somebody told me about another R.E.I group, and I joined that R.E.I group, and they have big like monthly meetings at this big hotel conference every month. And again, I just bump into somebody at one of the R.E.I groups, hit it off. And I was just talking, I was like, what do you do? And he's like, he goes, I do lending. And I'm like, what do you mean you do lending? Like, I've never met a person that does lending. And, he was talking about it, and then he's like, well, what are you doing right now? And I said, well, I'm an undergraduate. And he's like, what are you pursuing? And I was like, chemistry. I want to be a horse vet. And he's like, oh, science. He goes, you must be pretty good with numbers. I'm like, yeah, I'm in Calc 3 right now. There's a lot more letters than numbers in my math these days. And he goes, well, have you ever thought about being a loan officer? And I'm like, no, never on my radar. Why do you ask? And so he was actually looking for someone to kind of help work in the office and be a loan officer for his lending. And I'm like, all right. He told me a little bit about it there at the meeting. We met for lunch the next day. And he said the words like every undergraduate wants to hear, or college student in general, like you can work your own hours. And I'm like, sold, whatever this is.
Load. Yeah, that's the mother load. Here we go. Yes.
I was like, I will do that. And he explained a little bit about it. I went through the whole process of, I had to get a mortgage broker's license, but, went through that. And what it turned out, looking back, what it turned out to be, back then was he was actually a private lender. He had his own capital. He had friends and family he was brokering capital for. He had a little office. And back then, people had to like show up to a place and write out on this little rectangular piece of paper how much money they were going to give you. So like, just like the landlords, I would see the people come into the office. I'm the office person. And they're giving me checks for anywhere from like $700 to $2,700 every month. And again, being the talker, I'm like, oh, how's things going? How's the rehab going? This, that, and the other thing. And again, listening to people's stories and struggles, what I kept hearing, the recurring theme I kept hearing was, oh, the contractor ran off with half the deposit. I'm on my third plumber. We didn't get the right permits. The permits weren't pulled. Like, oh, the tenant moved in and paid first and last in security deposit and hasn't paid anything else in 6 months. But they were in my office in that first week making that mortgage payment, you better bet. So like, no matter what was going on, this was still occurring. And, the owner of the business, he was out on the golf course. Like he wasn't taking phone calls from contractors. He wasn't getting emails and messages at 2:00 in the morning, like, hey, the hot water heater broke. And he had me in the office kind of running the business. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to take that option. I don't want to be a landlord. So that really got my brain going. Like, this makes so much more sense. Why doesn't everybody do this?
Right. Yeah. And so that's what happens when you get exposure, right? Because you had this good fortune, and someone who also asked the question like, hey, look, you seem good with math and you want to do this. And so you then took action, which I think is amazing. Action takers typically are luckier people than most. I don't know why that would ever be, but it is one of those things. When you take more action, you get more opportunities exposed to those opportunities. So you start seeing the person that's out on the golf course that actually has a business, and then there are other people that are actually managing it for them. So you realize that you didn't like landlording. You realize that you didn't like, so was some of the fix and flip also a part of that as well? Because that was one of their businesses. Okay.
Yep.
Right, yep. That makes sense. Wow. Don't you just love this conversation? This is amazing. This is fantastic. And so just really quickly, I just wanted to remind you, for those of you that are looking to create more options for yourself, get there faster, and do that with long distance investing, make sure that you go to billykeels.com/7 mistakes to avoid, so that you can avoid all those mistakes, get to your goals faster and sooner. Once again, that's billykeels.com/7 mistakes to avoid. Now back to the conversation. So then you figure out that you get to this particular area that you enjoy. And I'd love for you to share with the Go Along family kind of the two things. Like, number one, how did you then take a step to start to go in that direction? Because at this point you're working for someone else. And secondly, where did the whole thing of like not worrying where you lived to be able to do your role? Because I know that that's very prominent in your life right now. Like, how did those two things come together?
So when we started, really, I would say the first 5 years we were married, we stayed in pretty much the same area because we were in undergraduate and graduate school. But then once he obviously became an officer, we were just bounced around. I've moved 20 times in the last probably 20 years. And it really just life, but obviously, again, not coming from a victim place, but just life just didn't give me the option to say, hey, let's sit down, let's have roots, let's do this. Some places we lived 3 months, some places we lived 6 months. And obviously back then, this was kind of before it was very ubiquitous to do distance real estate investing or distance investing in general. It was just kind of unheard of. And, some of the places we lived just weren't areas we wanted to buy in. Hawaii, I don't want, no, no. California, I hope the state falls into the ocean. Like, I'm just not a fan.
Don't say that. We have so many, we have a lot of friends and family from California. They love it for the sunshine. I
refuse to go back to California. I spent 5 years living there. I refuse. So I was just like, okay, I am not going to have, and again, not coming from a victim place, but just I'm not going to have the same opportunities other people have with graduate educations, with the normal track of what I wanted to do. Yeah. And again, listening to the landlord, it's like, okay, we did the landlord thing from 3,000 miles away. We absolutely hated it. We've done a couple fix and flips. We absolutely hated it. And then it finally came down to like, okay, what can we do? We have tried the things we can't do. We found out we are not successful at them. What can we do? And so I really started sitting down and thinking like, okay, what do I want? I want a horse. We'll just make it very easy. I want a horse. Okay, here's the cost associated with having a horse. If I can get that and I'm not behind a desk 40 hours a week because I want to be out at the barn in the middle of the day like this lady was, I'm like, what are my options? What am I left with? And, again, talking to people, I love talking to people. And it just kept coming back like, hey, we know someone in the military community that's an active investor. They need some capital to do this fix and flip, and just bumping into people. I'm like, sure, we can do that. Why don't we partner on that? I'm just going to be the capital partner. Don't ask me to pick out paint colors because my entire world's purple, green, and gold. Don't do that. And just over the years, it just kind of became like a side hustle thing. Like, hey, we bump into another military family that's doing this. We bump into another military family that's doing this. And then as we kind of moved, and obviously the military also moves them, we became distance investors by default. So we would have a borrower move from Virginia down to Florida, and now they're doing fix and flips in Florida. Sure, why don't we lend in Florida? Like, it just kind of, it was slowly just a side hustle. And then when the pandemic happened, the world just shut down here in Virginia in about March of 2020. And one of the things that happened that I think really set this whole thing in motion as becoming kind of a formal private lender is that hard money lenders shut their doors with no forewarning or very little forewarning to their borrowers. Yep. And then again, in a virtual networking room, I was talking to someone. He said, I'm going to lose out on this deal because I just got an email from my hard money lender. I'm supposed to close this deal in 2 days and they're not going to fund the deal. They're not funding anything. And I was like, well, tell me about the deal. You're here in Hampton Roads. And he told me, and I was like, if you can give me 2 weeks to get things together, I'm going to make an LLC. We'll do this. We'll do this deal. And it actually ended up working out better for him because he was able to go back to the seller. The seller ended up carrying the first mortgage for him, the mortgage that was already in place. He did a subject to deal. And then we actually ended up coming in and doing gap funding for the holding costs and renovations. So it ended up being a home run for him because the hard money lender closed.
Cool. So there's a bunch of different things that you talked about, and because we've not really covered a lot of the specifics on private lending, right? Or hard money, and you're talking about the gap funding, and some people they may be a little bit like, oh, hang on a second, I don't even understand that. Do us a favor, Alex. Can you go back just to give us because we've got there's a lot of high paid professionals, right? People that are super busy, whether they are IT sales professionals like I used to be, or mid-level managers and big multinational enterprise software companies, or maybe they're doctors or lawyers, because we're getting a lot more of them, to starting to I don't know, gravitate our way. But we haven't really spent a lot of time on even talking about like lending. So maybe you can help us understand just like the basics 101. You talked about hard money loan. You've talked about gap funding and what are some of those concepts just so people have a better understanding?
Yes. So basically as a private lender, there's a little bit of ambiguity in the language. So just for everybody's basic vocabulary, what I am considering private lending is me as an individual or me as a business entity is lending out my own capital to be secured by a property. And so that's securitization is called a lien. So depending on your state, you could be a mortgage, it could be a deed of trust. So it's very similar to what you would get from a bank. It's just obviously the capital is not coming from a bank. It's coming from me as an individual or me as my business. There is a move right now where hard money lenders are trying to rebrand themselves and they call themselves private lenders. And for better or worse, it's happening. I personally don't like it because it makes it very, what's the right word? Difficult for a borrower to understand where the capital's coming from. But the way I'm using private lending is I'm lending out my own money. So
I love that. So you're saying that. So, and also help us understand, because some people may not understand. I'm pretty familiar with what you're talking about. But when you talk about a private lender and a hard money lender, what does that mean for the person who may be one of those hard money lenders who's now saying I'm a private lender? What's the difference? What should we expect?
And again, my vocabulary, a hard money lender is going to be a business. You're going to have the rate and term sheet. You're going to have capital. They tend to be very liquid. So they're going to have a capital source outside of them as a business. So it could be a warehouse line of credit. It could be a debt fund. It could be just they're turning around and repackaging these loans and selling them on the secondary market. So they have the secondary market to kind of recapitalize. And I'm not to say that's a bad thing, and I don't want to give them a bad rap, but what happens in that particular case is they have sold someone. We'll just say they're using a warehouse line of credit. They have sold someone on the business model of, we will only lend in these states. We will only lend within these parameters with borrowers above a 680 that have done at least 5 flips in the last 24 months. There's all these boxes that have to be checked. And if you don't fit those boxes, they cannot do the loan, because whatever their pipeline looks like, they can't then recapitalize, because in a way you don't conform to what their business plan is. Whereas private lenders, we have the flexibility. So we don't have that formalized like rate and term sheet. It's a very much a relationship-based model. So it's like, do I as a person trust you as a person with your experience? The answers you're giving me to questions I have, do you have enough capital? It's much more relationship-based versus like, hey, I need you to check all 12 of these boxes before we can proceed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will understand what that feels like when you're going to try and get a mortgage on their very first property and they say, well, no, or yes, or whatever. It's very, very similar, but some of the conditions will be different. You talked about one of the other terms that you use that I want to make sure that everybody is familiar with. When you talk about recapitalize, what do you mean by that?
So when you lend out money, obviously that money, let's just say $100,000, leaves the bank account of the business. And then that is now out with the active borrower. It goes through escrow, it goes through closing, gets dispersed to the seller, the title company, everybody has to get paid out of closing. Well, now you as a lender have an asset. You have a note for $100,000. So if you want to then turn around and lend out more money, but your entire capital is now deployed, what you can do is what's called recapitalize. So you can sell that note, for example, on the secondary market. You could potentially package that note with a whole bunch of others and secure it. That's what a lot of conforming lenders do for the traditional, 30-year fixed buying your primary residence. So recapitalization is just a process of turning that asset of a note back into cash for you to then redeploy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for helping us here at the Go Along family understand that. So you started talking about it before, but I would love for you to kind of come back to the thing, because I know one of the things that you're very, very passionate about is building community, right? You've talked about living in different locations at the same time. And because of the things that have happened with the global pandemic that took place, and depending on when you're listening to this, and maybe it was yesterday, it was maybe, years ago. How important has community been to you? And also just what steps did you take to build this community that is continuing to thrive today? Because I think a lot of people really want to either be part of communities or want to also learn what are the effective steps to taking to build a thriving community?
Yeah. Community is extremely important to me. Obviously not living close to my family. It's just I need people, and I'm an extrovert, and I am married to a very, very, very introverted person. If I can get 10 words out of him at once, that's a chatty Cathy day for him. So when the world shut down, before we were part of a running club and we were part of photography and we were going out with other friends, and then the world shut down and we aren't doing any of that. And Alex starts to lose her mind. So I started looking for, again, because I had been part of landlord groups in the past, I'd been part of fix and flip groups, different R.E.I groups. So when the world shut down and I had this opportunity presented to me, I'm like, well, there's got to be other people doing this. Let's go on social media. Let's go find some groups of people that are doing private lending, because I have a million questions. Even though I have a lending background, I'm like, dude, I just know enough to be dangerous is what I felt like. And I still feel like that. And so I went looking. And every single group I joined on Facebook that had private lending, private money, any kind of lending was just a place for scams and spam. There was no conversation. There was no discussion. There was no networking. And I'm like, oh, what the heck? So I was talking to another military member and I'm like, don't dare a redhead. I'm just forewarning, do not dare a redhead. So he dared me to start a Facebook group. And I'm like, dude, I have 8 years of college. Never once did I take graphic design class and all these other things. He's like, just do it. And I'm like, fine. So I did it, started a Facebook group. I know nothing about running a Facebook group. And little by little, it just kind of comes. And then a week later, there was 100 people. I was like, oh crap, there's people are showing up. And then, a couple months after that, we had 1,000. And I'm just like, oh crap, now we really got to make something of this. And then you just kind of keep taking one little step at a time and improving one little thing. And you learn, through experience, trial and error, what works, what doesn't work. And the other benefit of this group was that it allowed me to have a place to go and talk to people. I could jump on these calls, we do a monthly networking call with other private lenders. And it's we can talk shop and we can be like, what are you seeing in your market? And I don't know how to evaluate this borrower. And it was just it just grew. And I've met business partners through this group. I know lots of other people who have met business partners through the group. And it's a place to bring people together centered around education and having that abundance mindset that even if I private lend, and if I teach 1,000 other people to private lend, they are not my enemy. They are not my competition. There's plenty of deals out there. So why not teach them and help my community be more prosperous?
I love that. And it's in my opinion, the right mindset. It's an abundant mindset, and it is, helping teach others to fish. And then, guess what? When they you're the person of reference that helped them to get to where they are today, which I think is fantastic. One of the things I did want to maybe bring you back a little bit as well, because like imagine, so today I know nothing about private lending. This whole landlording thing you were explaining earlier, it really doesn't sound like it's going to be me fixing and flipping. I'm way too busy because I make way too much money. The people that are listening here, they're thinking to themselves, that are part of the Going Long family, and they're thinking, well, but you're actually explaining this and this sounds kind of cool. And I'm a numbers person. I really like that. And it sounds like I can have a lot more flexibility in my time. I've got like $500,000 that's sitting over in the bank, but I have no idea, Alex, what I would even do. You just talked about this whole like understanding someone's profile and their ability to repay me. Like, what are some of the basics that someone needs to know? You talked about relationship and the importance of that, but maybe if you could just walk us through a really simple example of how someone that's just getting started would want to look at like one or two or maybe two or three different aspects of like, how do I do this? Because it sounds great, and also mitigate as much risk as possible.
So the fantastic thing I love about private lending is it's very collaborative. There are literally people that are paid to be involved in the transaction to protect you. So first off, all the money must flow through a closing company, an escrow company. A lot of people will say, oh, I gave my cousin's best friend $50,000 for his real estate business. And I'm like, no, you didn't do private lending. You just gave a business loan. You're never going to see that money again. I can promise you. So you're going to have a loan that's secured against a piece of property, whether that's a first mortgage or a second mortgage, depending on your risk tolerance. And then you're going to have title insurance. Again, the borrower pays for that for you. They're going to get an owner's policy, but you're going to require a lender's policy. They're going to have hazard insurance. You're going to be a loss payee on the hazard insurance. So again, the borrower is paying to cover your asset, essentially, because you have the debt on the asset. And then from there, it's really a matter of like, as much babysitting or as little babysitting as possible as you want. I particularly don't like children, so the idea of having to babysit an adult is not appealing. So a lot of my borrowers, it's just like they'll send me some pictures once a week, like, hey, bathroom went in, awesome, dude. Like, I'm not walking over there, I'm not driving through. Hey, you told me it was going to be beige and these tiles are gray. What happened? Like, I don't care.
Yeah. You got to know what's important to you and the things that are not important to you. But I mean, that's great. And so one of the things that I would, and I know you're going to talk to us a little bit before in a few minutes, but because a lot of these concepts, because the real estate realm is so large, there's so many different areas to play. And like the things that you're talking about, I'm sure are resonating with some people. And so the idea is, hey, listen, Alex is giving you the opportunity right now to learn just some of the basics. He's giving you like little tidbits. And I know that your community is thriving. Just tell us a little bit about where they can find your community right now. You'll tell them again later, but I think it's important for people to know now.
So we have a Facebook community. It's just south of 7,000 people now. And it's called Lend to Live Private Lending Lessons because it's designed to be educational. And when we were talking about community, this little community led to us actually publishing a book with Bigger Pockets about how to do private lending and a lot of those action steps, because there are some books out there, but they're very scant on details and they're very scant on those action steps. And like you mentioned before, you really need to be an action taker, not just, oh, someday I'll do this. Someday never comes. And so you have to take those steps. And I always tell people, you don't need to know the entire staircase. You just need to know the next like 2 or 3 steps. And then you get up there and maybe 2 or 3 more steps become visible and you get up there and you just keep going. So I 100% like just start reading, start talking to other people. I learned so much just talking to other people.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. We'll also include the show notes. In the show notes, we'll provide the link to your community. I'm sure you'll tell us other ways that we can get in touch with you. But here's the thing, like Alex, I want to keep talking to you forever. But you know what? We kind of have to get to the Going Long Final 3. And I never ask anybody the Going Long Final 3 unless you tell me that you're ready. So are you ready?
Let's go.
I knew you were going to say it. Let's go. Let's go. All right, here we go. So listen, we started with you over on the other side of the pond, as they say, the Atlantic Ocean. And even though I'm from Columbus, Ohio, I'd like to bring it back to this side of the pond, which is now part of where I am in my new adoptive home in Europe, where you will be very soon, or depending on when people are listening or watching, you've already been here. So I'd love for you to tell us, what is your favorite European city that you've either visited already or is still on your bucket list to visit?
Vienna, Austria.
Very cool. All right, Vienna. I love it. All right. Vienna is a wonderful place and it will be in the show notes. this is Alex's place. This is her place to go. So, which is awesome. And then here's the other thing. I kind of have to share some things that I've learned from, what's part of question number 2, that I've learned from like being able to interact with some pretty successful people. And I definitely consider you to be someone who's very successful, Alex. And I know that Going Long family does as well. And I'm hoping that you're going to agree with me that one of the things that helps to make really successful people, unlike most people, make them very, very successful is when they put together a plan, they devise the plan, they put it together, they execute perfectly the first time, which then allows them to go out to... I did it again. I do this every single time, every single conversation. I get all confused. Like I get all like all this positive energy. No, it's just a joke. It's an inside joke with me and the Going Long family. It's all good. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, Alex. Everybody go check her out on the video. If you're not watching the video, she's got like the most amazing smile. It's amazing. Great energy. Love it. But yeah, no, it's just kind of a joke. It's an inside joke with me and the Going Long family. But so the thing is I am very fortunate and I do see lots of interact with lots of very successful people. And I have noticed this one thing about really successful people, and this is no joke. This is true. Like really successful people, they make a lot of mistakes, like probably 50 to 100 times more mistakes if I had to estimate than most people, like a whole lot more mistakes. But the thing that is very true, and this is no joke, is that they do one thing very, very differently, Alex, and hopefully you'll agree. Every single time that they make a relevant mistake, or call it a learning opportunity, or call it whatever word you want, when that happens, they actually stop. They take note of what happened. And then from there, they actually go out and put different tactics, strategies, and actions in place to minimize the probability of the same thing happening again. Now, of course, you're thinking about the mistake that you made, or you're thinking about the learning opportunity, or however you want to talk about it. Keep that part in your head. But if you could share with us, because I think this is where the real power is sharing what's the one like lesson that you learned from this major mistake that you're thinking about that you know that the Going Long family needs to hear today?
It's really hard to kind of articulate, but that you have to keep going. Like people, they'll ask like, how do you keep this like crazy circus going all the time? Like, how do you do this? I have some health challenges. Like, how do you do this while having these health challenges? How are you doing training for a marathon, running three businesses? And I'm like, because I didn't give myself the choice. Like this is happening. So as long as you have that kind of dedicated terminal end goal, like it's just like, okay, well that happened. That's great. Let's keep moving because this has to happen. Like, and I don't mean you have it to such like a dogged dogma that this has to happen, that you don't care about the repercussions of your actions, but just like you have to believe that like it's already happened. Like I'm just fulfilling my destiny because I know in the future me, this is what future me is going to want. This is what future me has already done. I just need to keep moving.
Awesome. Keep on moving, keep on going. Don't stop. Have that clear goal that you're working towards, goal/dream, however you want to call it. Continue to move in that direction. And I think that's awesome. So thank you very much for sharing that. And then lastly, it's about being able to fill our minds with knowledge. What is the one book that you would recommend to us today, Alex?
This is an oldie but goodie. It's called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. It was written back, I want to say late 50s, early 60s. So it does show its age a little bit, but it is a phenomenal, in my opinion, it's kind of the godfather of all these like self-help books. And I usually will sit down and read it at least once a year, just kind of to refresh my memory. I truly, truly love it. So and it's something that I don't think a lot of people even know exists. Very few people are like, I've read that book, or, usually it's like, I've never even heard of this. Yeah.
Psycho-Cybernetics, definitely heard of it. It is on my list, my personal list. And I appreciate you sharing that with us today, Alex. And this is the part of the conversation when I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, like I want to keep talking to her forever because she's just very engaging. And I know the whole Going Long family is like, Billy, just keep talking to her. Just keep talking. But we can't, everybody. We can't. But what the cool part is, though, is we start talking about, if it always gives me the opportunity to kind of think about the things that we were talking about in the beginning, right? And it's just you from the very beginning talking about knowing versus understanding. You recognized that there were certain things that were missing in life. You realized that there were certain things that you also kind of wanted to, I guess you said you wanted to try them, right? Because you ended up finding out more about this real estate space, and it was a matter of saying, all right, well, I think this sounds really cool because this lady gave you enough money to buy 150 bottles of Gatorade, which I think is just amazing. I'm still not going to ask you how many you bought because I don't want to know what the tip was. Because I just think, but I want everybody else to think, what was the tip? Well, what should you get to keep? No, anyway. So when you went through that and you recognized like, hey, listen, there's something else that's out there. Then you got involved. You started taking action. You went to the R.E.I meetings. You started meeting people. You also had this knack for mathematics, and you had someone meet you and recognize that, hey, listen, well, she really likes this, and you started taking over a business. But then while you were there, the person was actually out playing golf, and you're thinking, well, hang on a second, that rather than taking all these different questions and complaints and all this kind of stuff, this actually seems kind of cool. And so you started realizing where you wanted to go towards by figuring out the things that you didn't want to do, which is getting the action and the activities and learning and building. And then as you were very, very mobile, 20 different states or 20 years and moving different places and probably been to 20, 30 places, you're coming to Europe pretty soon. That's really, really awesome. And so you're building this thriving community that has over 7,000 people. You're sharing in a space that's very unique, which is the private lending space. And you're really sharing experiences and you're building community, and it's about abundance and not scarcity. And I know that there are so many people that are part of my amazing Go Along family are thinking, oh my God, I want to get in touch with Alex. I want to find out more about her amazing company, Lend to Live. Please help us understand, how can the Go Along family get in touch with you, connect with you, find out what you're doing, more about your community and more about Lend to Live LLC?
Absolutely. So they can just search on Facebook, Lend to Live Private Lending Lessons. That'll get them to the group. They can join the group. It's free. Everything in the group is free, and it will always remain that way. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just look for Alex Breshears. My URL is invest passively to live actively, because that's my personal mantra, the lens. I try to look through for opportunities now. It's like, does it meet that criteria? Yes or no? And then, okay. And then I'm running this group. So we do weekly educational stuff. We do monthly networking. We usually have daily discussions and lots of opportunities for education and networking. And just reach out, send me a message on Facebook, send me a message on LinkedIn. I love talking to people, because I would rather spend 30 minutes or an hour helping someone do a loan in a more safe manner than just giving their cousin's best friend $50,000 and think they're investing in real estate. Like, I would rather help someone avoid that situation.
Yeah. Awesome. So listen, everybody, check her out at her Facebook group. We're going to include the show notes in the show notes. I kind of have this pet peeve. So whenever anyone says they connect on LinkedIn, I just want to remind everybody in the Go Along family, when you do reach out to Alex, because you're going to reach out to her, right? Just let her know that you were watching us here, you were listening to us here, because that will make your conversation so much easier. She's already going to know you've invested time to get to know her, and you've invested time to get to know her and what her business is doing. So just make it a personalized invitation. Please, 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 on LinkedIn. I almost said LinkedIn. That's what we say here in Spain, which is kind of funny. Anyway, see, these things happen to me. They happen to me all the time. Anyway, listen, Alex, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really, really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's just a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure that we're going to continue to stay in touch. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had a great time.
All right, awesome. And Alex, if you'll give me like 15 seconds, something like that, I just want to say the last words to the Go Along family. Wow. Alex was awesome. Like, literally take her up on the offer, reach out to her, connect with her on LinkedIn. Also, take today's conversation, sit down, listen again, share the episode with your family, with your friends, talk more about private lending. What are some of the difference between private lending and hard money lending? And what are some of the different things that Alex was talking about in terms of the way that packaging or repackaging type of loans or recapitalization? These are new concepts for some of you. And so take the time to learn about it, find out more. And when you feel stuck, we'll go over to our community and check it out. So while you're taking all this action, I'm going to be here waiting to welcome you back on the very next conversation. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much. Freedom! Wow. Don't you love hearing from top-notch experts in the field? You know, when I was getting started, I really wish that I would have had access to such experts. And even more, I wish they would have given me a really simple list of things to follow so that I could have gotten to my goals much faster and been much happier even sooner. So that's why I've created for you the 7 things that you should avoid in order to be successful in long distance investing. And you can pick that up really easily by going to billykeels.com/7 things to avoid. And also, if you liked today's episode, don't forget to leave a 5-star review. I'm looking forward to seeing you on our very next episode, so go out and make it a great day.